والسلام علي يوم ولدت ويوم أموت ويوم أبعث حيا.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So last time we stopped by verse number 64 of Surah Maryam. And shall we resume?
رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما فاعبده واصطبر لعبادته هل تعلم له سميا ويقول الإنسان إذا ما مت لسوف أخرج حيا أولا يذكر الإنسان أنا خلقناه من قبل ولم يك شيئا فوربك لنحشرنهم والشياطين ثم لنحضرنهم حول جهنم جثيا ثم لننزعن من كل شيعة أيهم أشد على الرحمن عتيا ثم لنحن أعلم بالذين هم أولى بها صليا.
الله يبارك أحمد.
وإن منكم إلا واردها كان على ربك حتما مقضيا ثم ننجي الذين اتقوا
ونذر
الظالمين فيها جثيا وإذا تتلى عليهم آياتنا بينات قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا
أي الفريقين
خير مقاما وأحسن نديا وكم أهلكنا قبلهم
من قرن. What is this ruling? إخفاء. نعم.
من قرن هم أحسن أثاثا ورئيا.
نعم.
قل من كان في الضلالة فليمدد له الرحمن مدا حتى إذا رأوا ما يوعدون إما العذاب وإما الساعة فسيعلمون من هو شر مكانا وأضعف جندا ويزيد الله الذين اهتدوا هدى والباقيات الصالحات خير عند ربك ثوابا وخير مردا.
وما نتنزل إلا بأمر ربك له ما بين أيدينا وما خلفنا وما بين ذلك وما كان ربك نسيا رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما فاعبده واصطبر لعبادته هل تعلم له سميا ويقول الإنسان أإذا ما مت لسوف أخرج حيا أولا يذكر الإنسان أنا خلقناه من قبل ولم يك شيئا فوربك لنحشرنهم والشياطين ثم لنحضرنهم حول جهنم جثيا.
ولدان يا أحمد.
ثم لننزعن من كل شيعة أيهم أشد على الرحمن عتيا ثم لنحن أعلم بالذين هم أولى بها صليا وإن منكم إلا واردها كان على ربك حتما مقضيا
ولدان.
ثم ننجي الذين اتقوا ونذر الظالمين فيها جثيا وإذا تتلى عليهم آياتنا بينات قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أي الفريقين خير مقاما وأحسن نديا.
الله يفتح عليك. Did you practice this at home? Very good.
كم أهلكنا قبلهم من قرن هم أحسن أثيا ورئيا.
أثاثا ورئيا. ورئيا.
قل من كان في ضلالة فليمدد له الرحمن مدا حتى إذا رأوا ما يوعدون إما العذاب وإما الساعة فسيعلمون من هو
شر. نعم.
مكانا وأضعف جندا.
وأضعف
جندا ويزيد الله الذين اهتدوا هدى والآخرات الصالحات خير عند ربك ثوابا وخير أمدا خير مردا.
مرد ولدان يا ما شاء الله. رحمت.
وما نتنزل إلا بأمر ربك له ما بين أيدينا وما خلفنا وما بين ذلك وما كان ربك نسيا. رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما فاعبده
واصطبر لعبادته.
هل تعلم له سميا. ويقول الإنسان إذا ما مت لسوف أخرج حيا. أولا يذكر الإنسان أنا خلقناه من قبل ولم يك شيئا. فوربك لنحشرنهم والشياطين ثم لنحضرنهم حول جهنم جثيا.
Well done. Next, Kaysan. It's 69. لننزعن. صلية.
ثم ننجي الذين اتقوا ونذر الظالمين فيها جثيا. وإذا تتلى عليهم آياتنا بينات قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أي الفريقين خير مقاما وأحسن نديا.
Well done, Kaysan. Well done. The sister's side. قبلهم من قرن أثاثا ورئيا. Danieli, well done. What's next? وما خلفنا
وما بين ذلك وما كان ربك نسيا رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما فاعبده
واصطبر
لعبادته هل تعلم له سميا ويقول الإنسان أإذا
ما مت
لسوف أخرج حيا
أولا
يذكر الإنسان أنا خلقناه من قبل ولم يك
شيئا
فوربك
لنحشرنهم
والشياطين
والشياطين
ثم لنحضرنهم حول جهنم
جثيا. Excellent. Excellent. Other reciters? تقوا Very good, mashallah. Other reciters? اهتدوا. Excellent. Other reciters? Okay. So last time we basically looked at the ways in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to be good followers of the previous messengers. And the last verses we concluded with, they were basically focused on providing some descriptions of paradise and that. But then the surah moves. The last verse we've looked at last time, تِلْكَ الْجَنَّةُ الَّتِي نُورِثُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا مَنْ كَانَ تَقِيًّا. That is the garden we shall give as their own to those of our servants who were devout. The verse with which we begin today is وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ The translator says, Gabriel, Angel Gabriel, said, we only descend with revelation at your Lord's command. Everything before us, everything behind us, everything in between, all belongs to Him. Your Lord is never forgetful. He is Lord of the heavens and earth, and everything in between, so worship Him. Be steadfast in worshiping Him. Do you know of any equal to Him? Man says, what? Once I am dead, will I be brought back to life? But does man not remember that we created him when he was nothing before? By your Lord, we shall gather them and the devils together, and set them on their knees around hell. We shall seize out of each group those who were most disobedient towards the Lord of mercy. We know best who most deserves to be burned in hell. But every single one of you will approach it, a decree from your Lord which must be fulfilled. We shall save the devout and leave the evildoers there on their knees. When our revelations are recited to them in all their clarity, the disbelievers say to the believers, which side is better situated? Which side has the better following? We've destroyed many a generation before them, who surpassed them in riches and outward glitter. Say, the Lord of mercy lengthens the lives of the misguided, until when they are confronted with what they have been warned about, either the punishment in this life or the hour of judgment, they realize who is worse situated and who has the weakest forces. But God gives more guidance to those who are guided, and good deeds of lasting merit are best and most rewarded in your Lord's sight. 2 minutes of silent reflection. Okay. Any thoughts? Burning questions? I can't wait until the end of the session.
So everyone is going to pass by hell?
Is that a comment or a question?
It's just a question. No, so everyone, even the people of Jannah, going
Okay.
to see hell.
So you're basically looking at verse number 71,
Yeah.
which literally says every single one of you will approach it. And the question is everyone going to join it? That's actually one of the key thoughts I wanted to share on this passage I myself had. Not just in relation to this one, but also in relation to the first verse with which we began this passage. وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. In the previous discussion, we were looking at descriptions of paradise, how it looks like. And out of the blue, the Quran says, وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. We only descend to you, we only descend at your Lord's command. لَهُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِينَا وَمَا خَلْفَنَا وَمَا بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ وَمَا كَانَ رَبُّكَ نَسِيًّا. How is that relevant to the previous discussion? What is the relationship? And then the same thing here. You know, there is a, when you come to study the Quran, one of the key Imams of Quranic studies is Imam Mohammed who died in 1905. He introduces the concept of al-wahda al-udwiyya, almost. What he means by this is literally the organic unity of the Quran. And he uses this expression. He says, Al-Quran kal-jumlati wahida. The whole Quran is like one sentence in terms of its precision, its comprehensiveness, and that there is a unifying theme to the entire Quran. There is a logic behind the sequence of the Quran. You know, one of the confusing things, especially to newcomers to Islam, newcomers to Arabic language, they are often confused about the structure of the Quran. How is Al-Baqarah leads to Al-Imran and Nisa, and what is the relationship between them? Who arranged those chapters to begin with? And these are not the first chapters that were revealed. You know, if you are to organize, to structure the Quran in the way it was revealed, you would begin with Surah Al-Alaq. The first couple of verses that were revealed were of Surah Al-Alaq. Right? Now Surah Al-Alaq is in the Quranic arrangement as we have it today. What is it? I think it's 98 or something. We have 114 chapters to the Quran. Surah Al-Alaq is number 98. Even though it was the first. These were the first couple of verses that Prophet Muhammad received. Surah Al-Qalam came next. And today, when you open the Mus'haf, you find Al-Fatiha coming first, then Al-Baqarah. What is this arrangement? Is there a logic behind it? In today's Quranic studies world, there is this standard belief that there is an organic unity to the Quran, that there is a logic to this sequence that not many people would get. As I said, for a newcomer to the Quran, for a newcomer to Islam, they would often fail to make sense of this. They would actually fail to make sense of single surahs, as in the Quran jumps. I mean, it appears to be jumping from a specific subject to another. A good example of this is what is happening with us right now. Previous discussion was in the descriptions of paradise, and then it discusses something different. وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. When you open books of tafsir, what they say this verse is talking about that situation when Prophet Muhammad was asked by the disbelievers of Makkah about those three questions. The one to do with what is the soul, what is the nature of the soul, who the people of the cave were, who Dhul Qarnayn was, right? And the famous narration would say that because the Prophet did not say, he said, I will answer your questions, I'll come back to you tomorrow. He did not say, inshallah. Jibreel waited for 15 nights or 15 days until he came to him. And Prophet Muhammad was longing for an answer because he promised it. But because he did not say, inshallah, Allah wanted to basically somehow remind the Prophet of this, of the value of saying inshallah. So the standard view would say this verse is talking about that. وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. So Prophet Muhammad, when Jibreel came to him, here is the answer to the questions they had. He says, أَلَا تَزُورُنَا مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَزُورَنَا أَكْثَرَ مِمَّا تَزُورُنَا. Like, what stopped you from coming as regularly as you used to? Or what stopped you from coming to us as often as possible? Jibreel says, وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. That's why the translator says, between brackets, and angel Gabriel said, we only descend with revelation when your Lord says, we are at His command. And then the question again, how is that relevant? The previous discussion was on something different. And the discussion moves. I'll come to your point in a minute. Which ones? How do we make sense of this? This organic unity is something that wasn't deeply discussed in pre-modern Islamic studies. Pre-modern Islamic studies did not really look, they were famous for something known as the verse by verse tafsir. The verse by verse tafsir literally says, what they do, what the Quran commentators in pre-modern Quranic commentaries, what they do, they analyze each verse. Mostly linguistically, maybe theologically, but each verse on its own terms. But to look at the whole surah in its entirety, to see what the link between those verses is, this was not a big thing. There are exceptions to this. Fakhr al-Din al-Razi does this sometimes. Burhan al-Din al-Biqa'i is much more famous for that, but it was not a big thing at all. Until this man came in, Muhammad Abdelnour, who introduced that concept, the organic unity of the Quran, that there is a connection between those verses. He says, even if it's too difficult, even if it's very difficult for you to really come up with that unifying idea between the surah and then the surahs. So between, we have chapters. So the Quran uses the term surah. And surah today is translated as a chapter. When literally this time, 100 years ago, 1925, 1924. This was the talk of the town in the Muslim world, scholarly circles and that. Should the Quran be translated by Muslims? It was translated by a number of Orientalists as early as probably the 15th century. But I'm talking about Muslim scholars translating the Quran into other languages. Many said, no, you can't translate the Quran. It's too difficult. Arabic language is so deep, you will have to compromise the meanings of the Quran if you translate it into English. So many scholars said, no, you can't translate the Quran. Non-speakers of Arabic, they need to learn Arabic. Muslims who don't speak Arabic, they need to learn Arabic so that they get to taste the Quran and see what it is about. A minority said, no. Even if we are compromising some of the message, the essence of it is not compromised. And if someone does not know Arabic, they at least should have an access to the overall message. If they don't really know the subtleties of the language and that, but at least they should have access to the essence of the message. This minority opinion became the dominant opinion later on. That we have we have 50 translations of the Quran today, probably even more than that. Many, many translators today we have. So when they came to translate the word surah, kada, surah al-Baqarah, and they were looking for a word that really equates the term surah, they thought the best one would be chapter. Chapter is not an English word, it's a Latin word to begin with. I think it says capitalium or something. And it literally means a section. And we know that each surah in the Quran is formed of ayat. Ayat is the plural of ayah. Right? And they were also struggling to translate the word ayah. So they came up with the idea of translating the word ayah as verse. The word verse is not literally English as such, it comes from a Latin origin. I think the origin of it is like verses or something. That literally means line. A line. Right? And to the Quran, the word ayah means, again, a sentence, a full sentence that Allah is saying, which is part of the surah. The question that remains is, how do I make sense of all this? Allah must have had an idea of what connects those ayat together, what makes a surah. No, the word surah comes from, those who are familiar with Arabic, the word sur. What does sur mean? Exactly, an enclosure. Something that closes on other things. So a surah is a sur that closes on other verses, ayat, whatever. That means they all belong here. So there is a connection between those ayat. The question that remains is, how do we make sense of this? So that subject is called today the tafsir al-mawdu'i al-Quran. We often do it, remember when we do at the beginning of each surah, what we do is we look at the holistic, what we call the holistic tafsir, the holistic meaning of the surah. What is the theme, or the thematic tafsir? When we do this, we are trying to really get at this, answer this, to understand what is happening in this surah. Sometimes it gets really confusing. And because this is a divine language. So you need to exert efforts. And you might not come up with an answer, or a definitive answer. Sometimes it's really, you have to dig deeper. And you might read and recite the Quran time and time again, and it opens up maybe in the 10th or 20th time or something. It does take, and it's an opening that Allah opens for people as to how they access the language and the beauty of the Quran. So, when they came to discuss this, if you apply this discussion to the verse that we have today, وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ, we descend when your Lord says descend. How is that relevant? Any thoughts on that? What is happening here? And then the discussion, you see, it says وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. He owns everything. لَهُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِينَا وَمَا خَلْفَنَا وَمَا بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ وَمَا كَانَ رَبُّكَ نَسِيًّا رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا فَاعْبُدْهُ وَاصْطَبِرْ لِعِبَادَتِهِ هَلْ تَعْلَمُ لَهُ سَمِيًّا. Those two verses have a context to them, as in you can come up with a context. I mean, the context that I just mentioned of the Prophet ﷺ engaging with the questions that the people of Makkah had. But then the discussion comes back to the discussion of hell, some of its descriptions, and people being gathered on the Day of Judgment. This, you can make sense of this, as a continuation of the subject of paradise versus hell. But those two verses, what are they doing here? 65, 66, I guess. This has confused me personally. How do you come up with something that makes sense in terms of this organic unity of the Quran? until I came across an interpretation that is not dominant at all. So as I said, the standard interpretation would say those two verses, that the ones that we began with today, these were addressing the Prophet ﷺ, addressing his question, asking Jibreel alayhi salam, why haven't you come earlier? If Jibreel says, I only come when I'm told to come. Al-Qurtubi says, وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. He said, actually, this is not about the Quran. Al-Qurtubi, one of the major commentators of the Quran, says, when the Quran says, وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ, it is not about the tanzeel, as in the revelation of the Quran. It's actually about the tanazzul, as in us being placed in specific places in paradise. وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. We take, تِلْكَ الْجَنَّةُ الَّتِي نُورِثُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا مَنْ كَانَ تَقِيًّا. Such is the paradise that we inherit the devout ones, the atqiya, the taqi, right? Which place would everyone take? The Quran is answering, وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ. Everyone will get a specific position, and God knows what it is. He owns us all. لَهُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِينَا وَمَا خَلْفَنَا وَمَا بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ. He knows everything about us. And those three references, مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِينَا, could mean the present moment. وَمَا خَلْفَنَا could mean the past. وَمَا بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ, مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِينَا could mean the future. It means the future. Could mean, and وَمَا خَلْفَنَا, what is behind us, the past. وَمَا بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ, that is the present moment. So God owns us in all those times, in all times. So it refers to a time. It could also refer to a place. God owns what is in front of us in terms of space, what is behind us, and what we have now. Right? If you look at this verse in the way Al-Qurtubi looks at it, it would make perfect sense in terms of the connectivity. Right? وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ لَهُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِينَا وَمَا خَلْفَنَا وَمَا بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ وَمَا كَانَ رَبُّكَ نَسِيًّا. Your Lord is never forgetful. How is that relevant? He is never forgetful of what each of you has done, what each of you deserves. If you've done a good thing, you get reward for it. If you've done a bad thing, you get punishment for it. رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He is the Lord of everything. فَاعْبُدْهُ وَاصْطَبِرْ لِعِبَادَتِهِ هَلْ تَعْلَمُ لَهُ سَمِيعًا. Do you know of anyone who equals Allah in this regard, of this dominion? Right? So what I just want to emphasize here is just the concept of organic unity, that you have to keep your mind busy with it. And because the Quran is, Allah describes the Quran as being the Kitabun Kareem. It's a very generous book with meanings. As in, someone might come up with a different interpretation. We're all trying to grapple with the book of Allah. So this does not have to be the one and only interpretation. Someone might come up with another interpretation. But it has to speak to this organic unity thing. Right? Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. I have a point that probably backs the interpretation.
Uh-huh.
And probably the second point is probably another interpretation.
Sure.
First of all, تنزل بمعنى putting everyone in their places. I think it's mentioned in the previous surah, Al-Kahf, the end. It says, إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات كانت لهم جنات الفردوس نزلا. And someone speaks of the تنزيل الناس.
You use the same language. Indeed.
الكلمة معنى النزل.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. Indeed. A very good point. So Al-Kahf uses the same language. كانت لهم جنات الفردوس نزلا. And it does make perfect sense, indeed. The other point?
The other point, usually when I find, to me, disconnected verses, I think of them as perhaps at times answering a question that can come up to the reader's mind. And following the discussion on Al-Jannah, تلك الجنة التي نورث من عبادنا من كان تقيا, probably to the reader's mind, who's willing to be one of these people, who's willing to be ممن هدينا واجتبينا, would ask, how can I be one of them? And the Quran answers by saying, وَمَا نَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَّا بِأَمْرِ رَبِّكَ. والتنزل هنا بمعنى الوحي, اللي هو I would say أعم من القرآن, أو النبوة هي أعم من الكتاب أو القرآن. It somewhat answers the reader by saying it's not something that you can choose, but rather it's something that's divine.
You don't choose, you get chosen.
Yes.
وَمَنْ هَدَيْنَا وَاجْتَبَيْنَا. So you don't aspire to become one of those, as in it's not your own work, it's Allah choosing specific people or something.
Or at least this message to choose.
Okay.
And nubuwwah as such.
Interesting.
And therefore, the next verse would invite the reader to further exercise or continue their journey to Allah by saying فَعْبُدْهُ وَاصْطَبِرْ لِعِبَادِهِ. That's why I just thought right now.
زيادة. أبشر. تسلم. خلاص.
That's why I had my mind just now.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. The only risk to this is the idea of the Quran addressing a question that the Quran presupposing a question that is happening in the reader's mind is very possible. But in relation to the point you're raising, it could there is definitely a scope for this in this context. But it would also jeopardize the idea of prophethood being earned or being conferred by Allah upon us. If someone does this or that, does this mean they will become prophets themselves? That could challenge that interpretation. But in general, yes, I do agree with that. The idea of the Quran answering a question that is perhaps in the reader's mind. Absolutely. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for that Surah Al-Kahf verse. Very relevant indeed. And that takes me to the question that was being raised. That takes me to the point that we've inherited from this verse by verse tafsir. Because what happens here, you've got many Muslims who just quote verses out of context. As in, when you discuss the idea of paradise and hell with many Muslims, they would quote this verse, everyone will have to pass by hell. Right? And they will quote this verse. But have we discussed the context? So, the organic unity is deeply linked to the idea of context. What does context mean in Arabic? As-siyaq, indeed. What is the siyaq? What is the context of this verse? It is discussing a very specific type of people, a very specific group. That is, وَيَقُولُ الْإِنسَانُ أَإِذَا مَا مِتُّ لَسَوْفَ أُخْرَجُ حَيًّا. Someone who denies resurrection. And the Quran is telling them, وَإِن مِّنكُمْ. Every single one of you, this group. I don't mean you as you. I mean you as a group, the group of disbelievers. وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. Not you as everyone who reads the Quran or everyone who is a believer or something. It is addressing that specific person who denies resurrection. وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. The word minkum is used in reference to the previous discussion, the context. What happens here with, this is very, very common, really. You've got Muslims who would say, you know what, the Quran says, وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. every one of you will get into it. This is a khas, as in Arabic we say it's a specific verse. It's addressing a specific type of people, a specific group. You don't universalize this. Right? كان على ربك حتما. And this is number one. Number two, because it goes against the bigger context of the Quran. The Quran says that the doers of good, the believers, the faithful ones, they won't get into hell. So how do I reconcile? Look at the context. The context is not addressing a believer, it's addressing someone who is denying resurrection. And to give you a bit of a context to this passage, the passage raises two key issues that disbelievers were raising. One is the one who denies resurrection. That's number one. Number two is literally the response when the verses of the Quran are recited to them. What they would do, the Quran says, they would say, look at us being racist. Look at our situation now. As in, we're good, we're wealthy, we're healthy. And look at the followers of Muhammad. These are the orphans, the poor ones, the nobodies, basically. These are two key issues that are being raised, and the Quran addresses both. Addresses the idea of resurrection by saying, Allah created you to begin with from nothing. That means it's much easier for Him to recreate you. That's the first response. The response to the second thing, the Quran says, because you should. The Quran is telling them you should not take the good time you're having now as a sign of your own goodness. You should not judge by what you have now, because this could be a test, this could be a fitna. And it's actually a sign of Allah's absolute independence. As in, the verse begins by saying, قُلْ مَنْ كَانَ فِي الضَّلَالَةِ فَلْيَمْدُدْ لَهُ الرَّحْمَنُ مَدًّا. Because Allah is in no need of us, He says, if you choose misguidance, Allah will extend for you by way of letting you do whatever you want to do, because He appreciates your freedom. He wants you to come to Him willingly, and if you choose otherwise, it's your choice. Allah says, because I am in no need of you, if you choose this path, I leave you to it. But there are consequences to this. You have to be aware of it. حَتَّى إِذَا رَأُوا مَا يُوعَدُونَ إِمَّا الْعَذَابَ وَإِمَّا السَّاعَةَ. And then He says, as for the ones وَيَزِيدُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا هُدًى, as for the ones who choose guidance, I will even guide them even more. See the parallel here. Those who choose misguidance, Allah said, okay, happy for you to choose that. It's your choice. For the ones who choose guidance because they like it, I will actually increase it. So I'm increasing both by way of respecting the choices. In this and that, because Allah is in the need of both of us. But He loves us to come to Him, or to even when we deviate, to deviate willingly, not by compulsion. I don't want to take much of the discussion, but happy if you have any other thoughts. Yeah. So you mean if this is a real question, or it's more of a rhetorical question? حقيقي. Sure. Mm-hmm.
And then he said before that we will take one of each وإن منكم إلا واردها ونزعنا من كل شيعة. Yeah. Okay. That's a very important question indeed. The Quran says, وَيَقُولُ الْإِنسَانُ, says, it speaks in very generic terms. The human being would say, or the man would say. Today we don't translate the insan as the man. It gets tricky. ويقول الإنسان وإذا ما مت لسوف أخرج حيا. It does not specify, even though we assume it's talking about the kafir, the disbelieving man, the disbelieving human being. The Quran uses this, and that emphasizes the idea of context. One of the things about the Quran is when most of the usages of the term insan is often used in that context, in the context of a disbelieving or ungrateful insan. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. That is, يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم. So it's, whenever the Quran uses the term insan, it's often in the negative. Right? And the Quran uses, uses what we call in Arabic al-hazf. It takes out words that would be understood from the context without the Quran having to state those explicitly. Think of أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر وكان وراءهم ملك يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا. And behind them there was a king who would literally take every ship. Even though all the commentators would say he would actually take every sound ship, every good ship. كل سفينة صالحة غصبا. We know this from the context. That's why Al-Khidr took one of the, pieces of the ship. But he did not really destroy the ship. He only took one part of it. Even that part was not really essential. Right? So the Quran has taken this word out because it will be understood from the context. And the meaning is كل سفينة صالحة غصبا. He takes every sound ship, not every ship as such. Otherwise, he would have taken the same thing. So ويقول الإنسان إذا. So from the context, you understand that the discussion is of someone who denies resurrection. How do we know if this is a rhetorical question or a real question as such? That's a tricky one. The context again helps. You have to read the passage in its entirety. And the difference actually between the real question and the istinkari question is not always clear cut. It could be both at the same time. But I get a very good question. Very good question. Other thoughts? Yes.
Is the verse 72 related to the verse 71?
Verse? ثم ننجي الذين اتقوا. Is it relevant? Okay, that's another good question. I don't know what's wrong with you guys today, mashallah. You ask very intelligent questions. Is it relevant to the previous one? If it's relevant, it would mean it would support the point that we began with, as in everyone will be in hell, but Allah will save the devout ones, or the al-muttaqeen. It is relevant, yes, but it does not necessarily mean that those muttaqeen will have to join hell first. It's as if Allah is telling you that on the Day of Judgment, there will be this, and that. As in, there will be people who are passing by hell, and there will be people being saved. If that makes sense. So it's relevant to the discussion, but it does not mean those would be saved from hell. If that makes sense. Does this make sense? Good. Speaking of this verse gets barely quoted within the discussion of salvation. Who will be saved? This is probably the most immediate answer the Quran offers. ثُمَّ نُنَجِّي الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا. My PhD was on salvation. I don't think I've ever come across a commentator who uses this word, who uses this verse to support the idea of what is the Quranic view of salvation. Here is the most direct answer to this. ثُمَّ نُنَجِّي الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا. If you get asked who's going to be saved, it's the people of taqwa. As simple as that. Is taqwa accessible to us? No, it is not. Who أعلم بمن اتقى. Allah is the only one who knows who the muttaqi is, right? So if you have a Muslim today who would say, Muslims are the only one to be saved. No, that's not right. Non-Muslims are all going to hell. That's not right. Allah is the one who knows. By the way, this is the prophetic approach. The Prophet ﷺ, and I quoted this hadith thousands of times by now. A man with the name of Uthman ibn Mab'un. Uthman ibn Mab'un was one of the early converts to Islam. Migrated from Mecca to Medina, attended and participated in so many of the early moments of Islam. And he died, I think, in the Battle of Badr, as a shaheed. So he's an early comer to Islam. Dying as a shaheed. It doesn't get better from within the discussion of salvation. And the Prophet ﷺ, he came after this man died. He came to literally attend his last moments and attend the funeral. And a lady of his house said, Rahmatullahi alayka ya Aba Uthman, Shahadati alayka laqad akramaka Allah. I swear by Allah that Allah has honored you. The Prophet ﷺ immediately said, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَكْرَمَهُ. How do you know? And she said, Ya Rasulullah, مَنْ يُكْرِمُهُ اللَّهُ إِذَا. If Allah does not honor Uthman ibn Mab'un, who else can be honored? He's an early comer to Islam, he's been murdered, he's died as a martyr. If he can't be sure of his salvation, how about us? من يكرمه الله إذا فقد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والله لا أدري وأنا رسول الله ما يفعل بي. By Allah, I have no idea what will happen to me. And then he said, ما علمت عنه إلا خير. I'm not saying he's going to be in hell. All I'm saying, we don't know. Allah is the only one who has access to this. And there are so many other hadiths that speak of this. This domain as a whole is not up to us, it's Allah's. We need to respect our limits. And this verse is a good proof to this. ثُمَّ نُنَجِّي الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا. The only ones who are going to be saved are the ones who are mindful of Allah, the ones who have taqwa. My latest article that was written on this subject is entitled, Who Will Be Saved, the Right or the Upright? The upright is a good translation of the word al-muttaqi. I mean, if you can share it in the group, again, for those who didn't have access to it, I think it's maybe in the group chat or something, but it literally addresses this very question. Yes, Ahmed.
Just on Taqi.
Yeah.
Because once we discussed it, and inshallah, you said you will tell us about Wali Allah and the characteristics, because we have access to an extent.
Sure.
The Wali Allah.
Sure.
Is there a link between them?
Taqwa and awliya. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the Quran answers this very clearly. ألا إن أولياء الله لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون الذين آمنوا وكانوا يتقون. So the Quran directly links al-wilaya to al-taqwa and al-iman. Maybe we can discuss this, inshallah, in the future. I think it's Aisha time by now. If you have any brief comments or questions, we can entertain one more comment. I know I'm conscious of time, it's just 1 hour or something. But inshallah, for the next session, probably have to be after Fajr, maybe. Next week is going to be Ramadan. So, inshallah, I'll discuss this with you, inshallah, over WhatsApp or something. But if you have any comments or questions we could end with, happy to listen. Yes, yeah.
Quite a quick one. It's interesting the use of the the word nasiya, and then they're talking about insan, and you always mention nisyan, and then Allah yaqul insan, like the insan is not remembering, but like Allah is like remembering everything.
That's an amazing thought to end with, yeah. And that's a very, the Quran is very ironic about the nature of the human being. The human being, the word insan means the forgetful one. And the Quran is saying, does the forgetful one not remember that he was once created? So an insan, and Allah is asking him to remember when it's in his DNA that he forgets. So, yeah, I thank you for that.
That's also a sign of forgiveness, then, because Allah calls him the forgetful, and please remember.
That's why He sends messengers, and Allah does everything for us to come back, to remind us. Yeah.
Next week we resume.
Probably a different time, but.
مباركا أينما كنت وأوصاني بالصلاة